On today's show, FanDuel has set the win total for the Cavs at 57.5 games this year. I think they're going to hit at least 58, and I'll tell you why. Plus, we'll discuss if they don't get to 58 wins, what went wrong for the Cavs. That's all straight ahead on today's edition of Locked on Cavs.
You are Locked on Cavs, your daily Cleveland Cavaliers podcast.
Part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hello, everybody. I'm Danny Cunningham, and I cover the Cavs over at my Substack, The Inside Shot, and you're listening to another edition of Locked on Cavs on Friday, October 17th. The regular season is closer than ever. We are just a few days away from the Cavs playing actual basketball that matters, and I, for one, cannot wait. But thank you for making today's edition of Locked on Cavs your first listen, and thank you to those of you that make Locked on Cavs your first listen every single day. You can find the show anywhere you get your podcasts, Apple, Spotify, or anywhere else. Do us a favor, give us a 5-star rating, leave us a nice review, and of course, make sure that you're subscribed so that you don't miss a thing. And if you're watching on YouTube, make sure you're subscribed there as well. Hit that thumbs up button and click the notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked on Cavs content. You're probably part of the Locked on Podcast Network, your team every day. In today's episode, brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new FanDuel customers can bet just $5. And if your first $5 bet wins, you will get $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Head to FanDuel.com to get started today. Speaking of FanDuel, the Cavs win total is set at 57.5 this year. Now, that is obviously a big increase from what their win total was set at last year, where it went into the season at 48.5. I did a show very similar to this one last year, and I talked very strongly. I think I even felt a little bit stronger last year that the Cavs would be over their win total than I do this year. And a lot of that has to do with the number that it was set at. And this year, 57.5 wins. So essentially 58 wins. No easy task, but I do think it is one that the Cavaliers will accomplish. And the first reason why I think the Cavs will win at least 58 games this regular season is because I think this team is better than it was last year. And let's take a trip back and think about what that team was last year, where the Cavs won 64 games. Had they needed to try down the stretch, could have been a higher number, right? Like they lost those 2 games against the Indiana Pacers where they really didn't play very many of their starters. They almost beat the Pacers in a game in which none of their starters played, and they went to double overtime in what was a very frustrating game because I don't know why that game needed to go to double overtime in a game in which starters for neither team played. And they still won 64 games. So you could look at it and say, well, they really were, by some metrics, a team that was closer to a 67 win team than a 63 win team, despite the fact that they won 64 games. So I look at that and say, all right, well, that was obviously a very good team. And then I look at what the Cavs did this summer, where I have talked ad nauseum about how much I like the addition of Lonzo Ball, about how I think Larry Nance Jr. is going to be a very nice pickup for the Cavs, and how I think this team is going to be a better team than it was last year. It's hard for me to sit here and say, well, they're better, but they're actually going to win 7 fewer games than they did last year. That is where it becomes difficult for me. And I understand that the Cavs had a lot of success winning some close games, particularly early in the season, and some of their close losses that they had came late in the season when they didn't necessarily matter as much as some of the early season close victories. So I understand that part of things, but I can't look at last year's roster and say, I think that one is better than this one, because to me, it's not. Will the Cavs miss Ty Jerome at times? I think so. Will they miss Isaac Okoro at times? Maybe. I'm not as sold on that one. Will they miss Tristan Thompson at times? Maybe in the locker room, but certainly not on the floor for any of his contributions in games in between, the sidelines. So I look at this and say, well, they won 64 and this team is better. And I don't think that necessarily means, well, they're going to win at least 65, because I'm not there. It is very, very difficult to win that many games in the NBA. And a lot of things have to go your way in order for you to win that many games in the NBA. But because I do think they're better, even if I don't know that they're going to win more games than they did last year, I think they're better. And that means there's no way they lose 7 fewer games than they did last year, because not only were some of the offseason additions they made, as I went through, I think going to be pretty important, but I also look at the internal growth, the internal development that this team is banking on. I think Evan Mobley is going to be a much better basketball player this year than he was last year. I think Donovan Mitchell, maybe not much better, but I do think he will be better than he was last year. I think we are going to see this season the peak of Donovan Mitchell. Maybe this isn't DeAndre Hunter getting that much better as a basketball player, but I think he's going to be a much more comfortable basketball player in Cleveland. I think he's going to be better in this system right now than he was when he was acquired in February via trade, because I think that's a really, really difficult thing to do. So I look at it and say, well, those are all areas where the Cavs should be better than they were last year. And it is difficult to be better than a 64-win team. But I think that this group is more balanced than they were last year. I think that this group also should be better defensively. Like last year's team won a lot of games because at times, and there are a few games that stick in my mind about this, like the game in Denver. I think they won 149 to 135. They could just outscore teams. And they had good defensive personnel, but they were never a great defensive team. I expect this year to feature a commitment back to the defensive end of the floor. And because of that, I think the Cavs are going to be able to more frequently than they did last year, because it's not as if they never did last year or were incapable of it last year, because those two things are not true either. But I think that there's going to be a bigger commitment to the defensive end of the floor, because I do think they realize, okay, that is something that when the postseason arrives, which all of this is all about, when the postseason arrives, the defensive end of the floor is going to be something that's very, very important to this team. So I do think that we're going to see them be better defensively throughout the course of the regular season. And I think that is going to be something that can help lead them to a few more victories. Not saying more than 64, but because I think that they can win games in different ways, it's hard for me to see them winning 57 or fewer, which is obviously a very high bar to clear. I also think, too, this team is still hungry. Right. We have heard Kenny Atkinson. We have heard players. We have, it's been an organizational message over the past couple of weeks that this is not a group that's in cruise control, that this group still feels as if they have a lot to prove. This group knows that they need to put together a very long postseason run for this to be even close to being considered a successful season. But in order for them to do that, I think they know they need to do the right things in the regular season. They need to play basketball the right way. I don't look at this group as one that says, yeah, we can take our foot off the gas. We can just kind of get to the playoffs and we know what to do there. Like, let's think back to the 2017 Cleveland Cavaliers. The year before, they won 57 games. They won the NBA title. It was the best season, obviously, in franchise history, because it's the only one that has ended with them holding the trophy. And then the next year, they were, in my opinion, a better basketball team. I think the 2016-2017 Cavs is the best team in Cleveland Cavaliers history. From top to bottom, I think there were no holes. I think it was truly a great team. That team, I believe, went 51-31. It was not a very good regular season team. Now, ask yourself, why was that the case? Well, there were some injuries, sure, but also that was a group that did not take the regular season all that seriously. And that group didn't take the regular season all that seriously because, one, they played until the very final day you could possibly play the year before. Their season ended on June 19th. The season for the Cavs ended in the middle of May last year. That might not sound like a big deal, but having an extra month of an offseason because of playoff shortcomings can be a big deal, especially at the start of the season, because the Cavs might be just fresh in a way that Cavs team wasn't. And also, that Cavs team knew what it took because they had just won a title. This Cavs team might know what it takes, but they haven't done it. They haven't earned the right to take their foot off the gas in the regular season, and I don't think that they will. That is part of the reason why I think they're going to win at least 58 games. And then the one other reason that I think it's hard for me to see them winning 57 or fewer games, the state of the Eastern Conference. So on FanDuel, the Cavs are, as I mentioned, at 57.5 wins this season. That is what their win total is set at. The New York Knicks, they're over 50. Their win total for this season is set at 53.5. That's pretty good. The Orlando Magic, their win total is set at 50.5. Those are the only 3 teams with a win total set at 50 games or higher. After that, you go to Atlanta, who is 46.5. You go to the Boston Celtics, 41.5. You go to the Detroit Pistons, 45.5. You go to the Indiana Pacers, the team that was very good last year, won 50 games, 36.5 because of injuries and, of course, losing Miles Turner as well. Miami, 37.5. Milwaukee, 42.5, which I actually love the over for that pick. I think Milwaukee's going to be a little bit better than that number. I don't think they'll be great, but I think they'll be a little bit better. Toronto, 39.5. Washington, 20.5. Brooklyn is in the teens. Like, there are in the Eastern Conference a lot of bad teams. Now, do I think I would pick the Cavs to win over 57.5 games if they played in the West? I'm not so sure. But I do think that them playing in the East is a really big deal when you have to think about this, because you're going through the schedule and you're looking at this and saying, well, they have to play so many of the Eastern Conference teams 4 times, right? Like, they play the Chicago Bulls 4 times, and the Bulls are not going to be, in my opinion, very good. It's not to say the Cavs are going to certainly go 4-0 against them, because they might not. They might lose to Chicago a game or 2, but they've got 4 opportunities against a not great team such as Chicago. They've got 4 opportunities against Boston, with most of them coming before any potential Jason Tatum return. They've got 4 opportunities against the Indiana Pacers. They've got 4 opportunities against the Brooklyn Nets. And then you even look at some of the other teams that are very good in the Eastern Conference, right? Like the New York Knicks, the other team that people expect to be right alongside the Cleveland Cavaliers. They have the second highest win total, as I just mentioned. The Cavs only play the Knicks 3 times. Now, is that one game the biggest difference in the world? Probably not, but I do think it's worth noting. The Orlando Magic, as I mentioned, they play them 4 times, but if you're playing the 3rd best team only 4 times, I do think that is something that can be looked at as a little bit of a schedule advantage, if you will. I think that is something that should be looked at and say, yeah, well, the fact that they miss the Knicks that 4th time, that I think is something that if you were kind of on the edge, you would rather play Atlanta a 4th time. You would rather, I think, play Orlando a 4th time. There are other teams, obviously all of the Central Division opponents you're going to play 4 times, and this is, of course, subject to change because of the in-season tournament. Like, if both the Knicks and the Cavs do not advance out of pool play, they'll probably play a 4th time, and maybe that throws a wrench into things. But I look up and down the Eastern Conference. There's just not a lot of good teams. And I think when there are not a lot of good teams in a conference, you're going to tend to want to lean over at the top. And that is not the biggest reason why I think the Cavs will get to 58 wins, but it certainly is one of the reasons why I think they'll go over their win total. What if things go wrong? Let's say they only win 57 games. How did we get there? What does that look like? We'll talk about it next right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show is brought to you by Wayfair. The holidays are going to be here before you know it. They're rapidly approaching, which is certainly exciting, but getting your home ready for guests and celebrations can certainly feel like a lot. It can be a very big undertaking that can put a lot of stress on you, can cause some anxiety, and maybe not quite ruin your holiday experience, but make it something that you might dread, because maybe your serveware needs a refresh or your guest room needs some new bedding because people are coming into town. Well, Wayfair has everything you need to get your home holiday ready, from Christmas trees and wreaths to bedding, cookware, and outdoor inflatables. It is your one-stop shop for every single room in the house and even things outside the house. Wayfair makes it easy to personalize your home for the holidays with a huge selection for every style and every budget. Plus, there's free and easy delivery, even on the big stuff, so you can get everything you need without the hassle of huge delivery fees. So get organized, get refreshed, and get ready for the holidays for way less. Head to wayfair.com right now to shop all things home. That is wayfair.com, Wayfair.com. Wayfair, every style, every home. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first listen. Thank you to those of you, as I said, that make Locked On Cavs your first listen every single day. The win total set at 57.5. I believe the Cavs are going to go over that number. I think they win at least 58 games this year. But let's say they don't. What do we think would have to go wrong for the Cavs to win 57 or fewer games? And to be fair here, if the Cavs win 57 games, this is not a failure of a season. What's going to matter is what happens in the postseason. Because do you know how many games the Cavs won the year they won the title? They won 57 games. So it's not as if you can't go out and be super successful in the postseason if you win fewer than 60 games. I just think they're going to be around that number as opposed to below that number. But reason number one for the Cavs potentially going under 57.5, I think, is health. I think that is where you have to look immediately. Because yes, we know Max Strus not going to play in all likelihood until 2026 because of the broken foot that he suffered this offseason. Darius Garland, we don't know when he's going to be back, but it does sure seem like Darius Garland is not going to be available at the start of the regular season. We don't know how many games he's going to miss. We don't know when he's going to be back, but we know that he's not going to play opening night. We don't know when, but he's going to miss some time. And I think that those things do have to be factored in. I actually think that they are factored in to this win total. If the Cavs are completely healthy going into the season, I think this number might be a game or two higher. I think the Cavs win total might be 58 or 59.5 as opposed to 57.5. So I do think those two health issues are a little bit baked into this number. But I also say, okay, well, with those two guys out, it brings the depth into question a little bit for the Cavs because you don't have an all-star point guard in Darius Garland. You don't have a very reliable wing in Max Strus. And it's not to say that the guys that will be replacing them for the time being are not capable, because they certainly are. I'm very excited, as I think you know if you listen to the show frequently, I'm very excited to see what Lonzo Ball looks like with the Cavs. I think DeAndre Hunter is going to open up a lot of eyes this year. I think he's going to be awesome. I think that there are a lot of really good things that we're going to see. But what if one of those guys gets hurt, right? Like, what if something happens with Lonzo Ball? What if something happens with DeAndre Hunter? The point here is that with the two injuries that are already pre-existing going into this season, it just kind of shaves away a little bit of that margin for error. Like, if DeAndre Hunter gets hurt and has to miss 2 weeks, but Max Strus is available, is it a bummer? Sure, but that's not that big of a deal because the Cavs have depth there. If Darius Garland were healthy and, twists his ankle and misses 10 days, that's not that big of a deal because the Cavs have Lonzo Ball, because they have Craig Porter Jr. But with Darius out, what if Lonzo, does twist his ankle and miss 2 weeks, 3 weeks? You're putting a lot on the shoulders of Craig Porter Jr. What if something happens to somebody like Donovan Mitchell or Evan Mobley? The Cavs can survive, but they're not going to win at a 60-win pace without one of those guys, considering who's already out right now. So I do think the Cavs have a lot of depth, but we're going to see that depth tested early in the season because of the two major injuries they already have. And one more injury right now, and things can get really thin on that front really quickly. And that, I think, is the biggest thing that could put this win total just in a little bit of jeopardy. Reason number two is the Cavs do have some unproven members of the rotation. And I don't think that was necessarily true last year. The Cavs had a lot of continuity going into the season last year, which was a great thing, right? Especially when you're bringing in a new coach like Kenny Atkinson, because it is much easier for a roster that knows how to already play together adjust to a coach than having a group having to adjust to a coach and a bunch of new teammates. And the Cavs didn't have that last year. So I do think that was part of the reason why they were able to just get rolling right away. They didn't have to try and figure out each other's tendencies while also trying to figure out how Kenny Atkinson likes to handle things, because I do think that is a challenge. But this year, they've got guys that they do have to integrate. I mentioned Lonzo Ball. I mentioned Larry Nance Jr. Thomas Bryant is in the rotation. But it's also a couple of unproven guys. Craig Porter Jr. is going to be asked to have a role as part of the rotation at the start of the season. Jalen Tyson's probably going to be the 7th or 8th man for the Cavs at the start of the season. The Cavs are counting on those guys not to be stars, but they're counting on them to contribute early on in the season. And that, to me, is something to watch, because I think Craig Porter Jr. is ready for this. I think Jalen Tyson is ready for this. But you really don't know until you actually know. Like, you don't know until you see it and have proof of concept. Because Jalen Tyson last year did some good things in the limited minutes he played. But there wasn't a lot of consequence to those minutes in terms of the outcome of the game. That's not going to be true this year. Jalen Tyson's going to be counted on. Craig Porter Jr., who I think has looked very good in the preseason, he's going to be counted on in a way that he wasn't really at all last year. And I think that is something that is important to think about. Like, What if those two aren't ready? What if those two aren't good enough? Then, as I just got done talking about with the depth, that becomes a bigger issue. And I think that is something that could lead the Cavs to maybe floundering a little bit until Darius Garland and Max Strus are back. And this team is whole again, because when that is the case, I think then they will win at a 60+ win clip. It's just, what if they don't until that happens? And then the last thing is not something I believe will happen because the Cavs have talked about it not happening. But what if the Cavs do take their foot off the gas? What if they are, for lack of a better term here, what if they are in cruise control throughout the course of this regular season? And instead of really trying to build the right habits and doing things the right way, what if they just say, hey, we'll see you in April. We'll see you in May. We'll see you in June. We know what it takes. We don't have to do all of this hard work in December and January, February. We can just show up when the playoffs arrive. We're talented enough. We're good enough. There's not a team in the East that's more talented than us. And I believe that about the Cavs. I do think they are the most talented team in the East. What if they do their best impression of the 2017 Cavs, where that team was obviously the favorite to get out of the Eastern Conference, and they went 12-1 in the Eastern Conference playoffs that year, but they didn't take the regular season seriously. I don't think that will happen. I do not believe that's going to be part of what the Cavs do this year. However, if it does, the Cavs are not going to win 60 games. If the Cavs don't put forth the required effort this year, they will not go over. That is, I think, an unlikely thing. But if the effort slips, if they don't build the right habits, if they don't take the regular season as seriously as they should, well, then you're looking at the Cavs going under 57.5. Now, there is one other thing on FanDuel that I find to be interesting. It has changed a little bit over the past 8 weeks or so. I'll tell you what it is, and I'll tell you why it's interesting next, right here on Locked On Cavs. But first, today's show, believe it or not, actually brought to you by FanDuel. That's right. The NFL season is here, and FanDuel has an offer that you don't want to miss, because right now, new customers with FanDuel can bet just $5 and get $300 back in bonus bets if you win. That's right. Pick a bet, put down $5, and if it hits, you will unlock $300 in bonus bets to use all across the app. Thursday night football happened last night. It is 3:00 in the afternoon as I record this, so I have no idea who won. I have no idea who covered. So we're not going to talk about that. What we are going to do is we're going to go to the Browns game against the Miami Dolphins on Sunday in Cleveland. I don't know if you've seen the weather forecast for this game. I think like 90% chance of rain. There are going to be wind gusts, allegedly, between 50 and 60 miles an hour. Now, am I confident in betting on the Browns minus 2.5 against anybody? No, I'm not. So I'm not going to do that. What we're going to do, we're going to go over to the right. I'm looking at the total for this game, 36.5. Now, Miami's defense stinks, and I think on a nice weather day, the Browns would actually score 20 points against them. However, this is not going to be a nice weather day. So I'm going to take the under 36.5 here, because I just think points are going to be very hard to come by. The Browns defense is good. I think that they will win this game. I don't love saying that, but I do think that this could be a game that finishes like 7-3 or 10-7. And you're looking at a relatively safe under. I think that is something that I like. If I'm forced to make a pick on this game, that is what it is. So maybe that's going to be your first $5 bet with FanDuel, because if it is, you can put that down. And if it wins, $300 in bonus bets are yours to use all across the app. So what are you waiting for? Visit FanDuel.com. That is FanDuel.com to download the FanDuel app today and get started. Again, FanDuel.com, FanDuel.com. Thank you again for making today's edition of Locked On Cavs your first watch, and thank you for making Locked On Cavs your first watch on YouTube. If you are watching, do us a favor, hit that thumbs up button for us, click subscribe, hit that notification bell so you don't miss the latest Locked On Cavs content. And while we are sticking with the gambling angle on today's show, there's one thing that if you listen to the show, you know that I do track frequently, and those are the futures odds, because I find just that to be an interesting way to look at how the Cavs are viewed in the long term, because things are going to fluctuate from day to day. But how you're viewed as a long-term team typically holds pretty steady. For instance, the Cavs have been plus 650 to win the title on FanDuel for a couple of months now. They've been not the favorites. That's Oklahoma City, whose odds have actually gotten just a little bit shorter at plus 195. I believe they were like plus 210 a few weeks ago. So that hasn't changed. But what has changed, if you think back to in the month of August, late August, the Cavs and the Knicks were not quite co-favorites to win the Eastern Conference. I believe the Cavs were plus 270 to win the East, and the Knicks were plus 280. So it was close. It was basically, for all intents and purposes, that's a toss-up, right? Between those two teams, at least. Like, their odds are close enough. Not to say it's a toss-up that one of those two are, because there are, of course, 13 other teams in the conference. But now, at 3 o'clock on October 16th, and this has been trending in this direction, the Cavs are plus 200 to win the East. The New York Knicks are plus 400 to win the East. So what was a very thin margin between those two teams has widened quite a bit with FanDuel. And I find that to be interesting as we learn more about these teams. Now, of course, we will start to learn a lot more about these two teams next week when they play against each other at Madison Square Garden on Wednesday night. But I look at what this offseason was, and I think there was more hype around the Knicks than the Cavs for what they did this summer. And I don't love New York's summer. I don't know that they really got tangibly better. Like, I don't know that Jordan Clarkson's going to be a great fit. Malcolm Brogdon has already seen enough, and he has since retired, which happened the other day. So I look at this and say, well, you know, which team has fewer holes? And I think the Cavs are the more talented roster. I think they're the most talented roster in the Eastern Conference. I also think they have the more complete roster. And the other thing that I come to look at, and this worked out very well for the Cavs last year, but it's the new coach effect. And I think part of the reason why it worked out so well for the Cavs last year is Kenny Atkinson was certainly a different personality than JB Bickerstaff. I think that's a fair thing to say. And in New York, I think Mike Brown is very much a different personality than Tom Thibodeau. However, I don't know that Mike Brown is all that different stylistically from who Tibbs is. I think in terms of the actual basketball stuff, I don't know that he's going to change a lot. And I don't know if that's necessarily a good thing, because Kenny Atkinson not only was a different personality than JB, he changed a lot in terms of how the Cavs looked on both ends of the floor. The defensive stuff, I don't know that you can say for better. The offensive stuff, they turned into the second most efficient offense in NBA history. So I think that is a smashing success, it's fair to say. So I look at this and say, well, something doesn't feel quite right about that. Like, something feels just, I think, a little bit off with the New York Knicks. And I don't think that these odds would shift in the way that they have if everything felt right there. I don't know. It's a long way away, and I don't know what these two teams are going to look like if and when they meet in May with a trip to the finals on the line. But I look at this and say, I think people are starting to feel a certain way about the Cavs, and I think people are starting to feel a certain way about the Knicks. And I think that is something that is a good thing for the Cavs. So that's going to do it for today's edition of Locked on Cavs. Thank you for making today's show your first listen. And like I said, to those of you that make Locked on Cavs your first listen every single day, very, very much appreciate it. Thank you so much for that. Make sure you're subscribed wherever you get your podcast, because the games begin next week. The Whip Around is back next week. I've already done an interview with Camille Davis from Locked on Bucks. We'll be talking next week about the Knicks. We'll be talking about the Nets. We'll be talking about the Bucks, but it's finally here. Cavs basketball is back on Wednesday, so we will be looking ahead to the specific games that the Cavs have early next week, and I am very much excited for that, and I know that you are too. So as we get out of here, do me a favor, hit the thumbs up button on YouTube, click subscribe, because that is the very best way to help Locked on Cavs grow, and make sure you hit that notification bell. And I'll be back next week talking about actual basketball for the Cleveland Cavaliers.